So it's 6 o'clock in Bangkok. I think a few people will still join and drop in, but I want to welcome you anyway to another seminar of our series, Digital Project Practice, turning ideas into impact. Today we have David Galipeau, but before I hand over the stage, I want to share just a very few slides with you to give you some background what it is about, why we do this webinar series. So basically, the webinars of the series are based on the book series and from the contributors and chapter authors of Digital Project Practice. We have already 3 books in this series. You can find it also on our website. I put that in the chat. Where you will find maybe more information. So if you are interested in the topic that we present today, you will find that especially in the book Digital Project Practice for New Work and Industry 4. We also have a LinkedIn group. So I would like to invite you to join our group on LinkedIn for Digital Project Practice. We will have a Q&A today after the short presentation, but if you come up with a question later on, or if you want to comment on this topic or other related topics, feel free to join our community. I also want to use this as a little a teaser. If you are interested in the book or any book of this series from Routledge, then I could convince the publisher to give us a discount code that you can use on the web. On Industry 4.0 and how it influences our work and general our environment. David, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'm looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Tobias, and thank you for everyone dropping in. Let me share my screen. Let's go with this one. Can you see my screen? Somebody nod their head. Okay, cool. Okay, as you know, in the book series that Tobias was talking about, I wrote the chapter on Industry 4.0 and the new work environment. And quite honestly, as an investor, as a lecturer, as a technology researcher, this future work concept comes up a lot because it's really unsettled. So just as a way of getting into it, if you have any questions, simply ask the questions. There's a chat box that's open. Someone can monitor the chat box. I will put a version up so I can see the chat. But if you have any questions at any time, simply ask. If you want to dig deeper, if you want to look around if I speak too fast or some terms you don't understand, not a problem. And ask the hard questions. I mean, here's the opportunity. There's a lot of hard questions when we start to think about what's coming ahead. So don't be afraid to ask any of the hard questions as well. So as we start to get into it, the future work is already here, and this happens quite often. When we talk about the future, we talk about technology and evolutionary change that happens. It happens continually. It's been happening for centuries. The problem now is things start to pick up. So we're facing sort of an environment of speed and complexity that's starting to hit us right now. So the future is coming fast. When we start to look at work, the way that work used to be established around accomplishing, now humans have to compete with technology. And this is something that is really, really uncomfortable, not only for humans, not only for workers and staff and superiors, senior management, but also for markets, also for economic models, also for education. So it has a big impact as we start to look at it. And it's happening right now. I mean, this is happening really fast. If you look at the development of ChatGPT, only as an example around artificial intelligence, that happened really fast. It was expected to take 3 to 4 years to develop where they are. It took about 2.5 months. And now you see the rapid change that's happening through that. And when we talk about location, it's happening everywhere. This is something that's happening across the board. So when we talk about latency, and the way that some of the technologies are going to propagate around the world, internet took a long time to propagate, where a lot of these new clusters of technology are happening really fast, and they're coming from different areas, not only from the West, also from the East. So when we talk about these types of things, Goldman Sachs did a recent study, 2/3 of current occupations over the next decade are going to be affected. Right off the top, I will say that if you're reading The Economist, BCG, McKinsey, any of these types of things, it tends to be a lot of whitewashing. The impact is going to be faster and stronger, because when we look to the future, we really don't know what's going to be like in 10 years from now. Anyone that says they're an expert in technology or any of these types of area, they're trying to sell you something. Because things are happening incredibly fast. We really do not know what the future is going to hold in a lot of these areas. 50% of the work people do now can be taken over by an algorithm. That 50% is going to change rapidly. 800 million jobs worldwide could be affected, according to Goldman Sachs' recent study. 800 million. That's not going to be centrally balanced across all nations. That's certainly going to hit other nations harder. Certainly when you come into low-cost economic models, Bangladesh, Thailand, some of the other countries in Asia, but certainly Latin America and South America. We talk about skills. So the distribution of job losses are not going to be broad. It's going to be very pocketed in certain economies. AI's ability to generate content indistinguishable from humans, break down the communication between humans and machines. These are some of the impacts that's really having a big, big influence on where the future of employment is going to be. And we'll talk about that as we start to get into it. But let's step back a little bit. These are 3 books, interesting books anyways, if you're listening to the books. But the 3 areas where we talk about employment, Industry 4.0, it's not necessarily about jobs and technology. We're talking about markets and new types of economic models. We're not only talking about technology in the simple form, we're talking about very complex technology and clusters of technologies. Artificial intelligence is interesting. Robotics is interesting. Artificial intelligence and robotics is even more interesting. So the multiplier effect, as you start to layer technology on top of other technology, this is going to have a huge impact. And then we're talking about disruption, hopefully positive disruption, but disruption is coming. And this is when you look into what is the purpose of an organization. Really, it is to manage risk, create value. This is what's happening. But when we talk about risk, it's going to be disrupted, certainly with big data, data analytical tools, privacy, cybersecurity. A lot of disruption comes in there. Economics are going to be disruption, behavioral impact, not only consumers, from the policy side, investor side, employee and staff side as well. So all stakeholders are going to go through a bit of a behavioral change. So when we talk about disruption, there's going to be a lot of disruption. So we break it down into 6 drivers. When we look at economic models, they were established 50 years ago. Governments ran most of the economies, and they were pushed really towards citizens. This was sort of the focus. Governments were managing it towards citizens. But as the economies become more complex, as the globalization started to happen, really managing an economy was too complex for a government. So they start to privatize, they start to hand it over to private sector. So the market mechanisms really start to come in and manage the complexity of a global market. But the focus again is around citizens, now more shifting towards consumers. So the whole consumerization starts to come up 50, 60 years ago. Private sector, even getting to the point where what is traditionally government, education, security, a lot of it is went through with Thatcher and Reagan, went through the privatization. So the privatization of even the social goods and the public goods started to happen because they became too complex. What we're starting to see now is really this shift. The market mechanism is starting to shift, but it really is a shift towards technology, the advancement of technology, as opposed to the advancement of citizenship that was traditionally brought on through the social contract. So if you ever read Shoshana Zuboff, Harvard scholar, a number of her books are down there. Instead of labor production and property driving business innovation, what we're seeing is this first driver is this mutation of capitalism. Some call it techno-capitalism. But this mutation of capitalism is based on monetizing data and behavior control through technology advances, resulting in new economic models. Obviously, that's going to put a lot of pressure on what skills and talent is going to be required for these new models. So this is becoming really starting to challenge the certain education fields that are out there, but also the skills and talent. The second driver is really managing the speed and complexity. And the easy way to go through it, if we start to look at innovations, paper, movable type, mechanical loom, production line, how quickly the propagation, the technology was diffused around the world. When you start to get to the internet, even though it was a fully digitalized, relatively a simple technology, a non-sophisticated technology, even that took time to go around the world and get in. Even right now, as we're currently speaking, 20% of the population of the world is still not connected onto the internet. Digital cash, the whole concept of fintech, that came out fast, but because of financial illiteracy, the consumer credit bubble, all these different types of models and the pushback from the traditional financial sectors, even that took a long time to start to go around. But when we start to look at the new clusters of technology, material science, 5G and IoT, artificial intelligence, machine learning, anything around the neural and cognitive computing, automation, biotech, cognitive systems, these types of things, what we're seeing is the propagation around the world is moving incredibly fast. Artificial intelligence is moving across robotics, material science, and certainly biotech and genomics. And it is not only coming from the West. Now we see China, Singapore, and other countries from the East really starting to push and develop brand new innovations, brand new types of technology. So we're seeing the sort of multi-directional focus of technology, and that's going to help really push this. So when we start to look at this, managing speed and complexity, certainly when it comes down to business models and staffing, really, really complex. The third driver is really around innovation and invention. When we look at, this is a literary review, academic research, journal papers going back to the 1800s on the terms of innovation and invention. And you see invention, the red line. Invention was really, things were being developed, brand new ideas, brand new inventions were being developed for the longest time until around the 70s, mid 70s, going into the 80s. And at that point, innovation started to happen. So we look at invention, creating something new, innovation, using new things, but for other purposes, that really started to happen. And that was really around the creation of the internet. The cost of knowledge exchange, the cost of knowledge sharing, the cost of communication was reduced drastically, not only in financial cost, but also in time. So all of a sudden, with the result of the internet, as much as it impacted the economics of the world, it really had a big impact on innovation, where people could see what was happening around the world. Different people could work together very quickly to come up with new ideas. As Silicon Valley was coming up with the internet, the whole dot-com phase was starting to come out in the mid 80s. Europe was picking up very quickly because it could see what was happening. It could communicate, it could collaborate, it could partner very quickly. What we're seeing now over the next few years is the reverse of that shift, because there is so much new technology coming down the pipeline. Certainly, there's a lot of non-uses. So when we go back to the research institutions that really have a no profit motivation, they are creating brand new inventions just for the sake of creating brand new inventions. That's really starting to happen. So we're going to see this actually change very quickly. And quite honestly, if you look at the strategic side of it versus the financial trends, advancing current business modeling, demanding new skills, new models, new job descriptions, new markets, and new talent. Financially, you're going to see a lot of things start to shift. AI-based innovation, upskilling, tennis development, really moving from HRM to HRD, HR management to HR development, really to self-manage as well, providing financial returns only, eliminating the elimination of employment fully. So these new models are starting to come in. As a fourth driver, and this is something really interesting, sustainability. The concept of ESG and this concept of sustainability is having a huge impact when it comes down to the required talents and required skills moving into. And that's because the pressures, the economic models are starting to shift over. Instead of businesses managing their value chain, supply chains, their global value chains, we're starting to see a lot of pressures now on business. Instead of just producing products and services, we're seeing pressure from policy, government policy around ESG, the United Nations SDGs, net zero, all these types of things, climate change, are starting to come down, and governments are following through with policy. Policy is not law, but it's going into law. So we're seeing it from government. We're seeing it certainly from consumers. The consumer behaviors is changing more towards earth-friendly, sustainable products and services. We're also seeing it from investors. Investors are shifting to green investments, impact investment, social enterprises. We're starting to see a lot of this coming in from investors, and certainly from staff, talent. The hunt for talent is on. Companies are looking for talent. There's just not enough talent to go around, but talents are choosing to work for companies that really have some sense of sustainability or ESG within their mission or their vision. So we're seeing sustainability really starting to come in, and that's starting to really have an impact on innovation, investment, and business models. We're seeing it also through technology advances. Industry 4.0 is coming. We know that. Most companies are going into thinking about digitalization. What does that mean? How do we push into that direction? So they're all going to that model anyways. When we look at sustainability from a business standpoint, basically business continuity, will your business survive over the next 5 to 10 years with all this pressures coming from government, investors, consumers around sustainability? How does that's going to come in? But when you start to look at a lot of the new technologies, when we talk about optimization, efficiencies, lowering the cost of energy, lowering the production costs, increasing quality, QA and QI, how these things are happening, you can actually look at Industry 4.0 and sustainability as a common project that's going forward. And a lot of companies are actually looking at that as well. But at the same note, we are going to see more disruption, fueled by better rationale, more collaboration, certainly. And this is really starting to look into a lot of this business continuity and risk management. By managing sustainability, by managing ESG, you are managing risk, climate-related risk, disruptive-related risk, technology-related risk. So we're starting to see that as well. As the fifth driver, we're starting to see the economic drive starting to change. If you look at the three horizon, standard. This first horizon, if you look at the axis, the X and Y axis, underlying economic principle versus really where we are right now, the transition time and then moving into 2030 and beyond. And right now, the signals are really starting to shift away from consumer-driven economic models towards data-driven economic models. And we're starting to shift the transition because of data towards technology-driven, better analytical tools, better technology that can really support the replacement of human labor and how that starts to come in. So this now becomes a big driver in handling this transition. And believe me, the next 10 years, it will be a transition. There will be a lot of change over the next 10 years. It won't be that we're going to change from for example, from no internet to the internet. With the evolution of all these technologies, certainly the clustering of technologies, rather sophisticated technologies, we're going to see this big shift start to come in. And technology driven, the creation of new employment classes, new business models, new markets, responding to these disruptive opportunities. Again, the purpose of business, managing risk, creating value. And how do we do this better with technology as opposed to human labor? And the sixth and last driver, when you take the combination again of the sustainability of this and industrial revolution, new operating models, new market structures, new behavioral change. This is evident that's going to come off with the impact of these new technologies. When you start to look at systems level, that is the social contract, global economic models, global value chains, what you really have to watch out is for responsible deployment, responsible scaling, and then raising trust. Right now, trust is at an all-time low. Trusting governments, trusting the media, trusting communications, it really is at an all-time low. So because of these two coming together, this is where. So when we start to look at all these different drivers behind what will the future of work start to look like, we're moving into this techno-capitalism. It's probably the next evolution. Grounded in technology and science, sponsoring new forms of corporate powered organization that have major complications over the next 20 years. Network society, knowledge economy, cognitive capitalisms. When you start to rethink Marx, if you go back to Marx and read Marx again, the labor theory of value, dialectical relationship of technology and capitalism. Now, if that labor is not human labor, but actually technology-driven labor, that really puts an interesting concept when we think about what is the future of the economic models that are going to be driving the demand for labor. The Chicago-style economics, we know it doesn't work. It breaks every 6-7 years. A financial crisis is going to come again. We all know that. So they haven't come up with the optimal model. Whether you believe in the politics of China or don't believe in the politics of China, what China is doing is really interesting. Centralizing the control of government, decentralizing the control of the economy, the exact opposite of what Russia did back in the day. It's a really interesting model. So these models are starting to come in now with the infusion of brand new technology, AI-driven decision modeling, AI-driven government, algorithmic governance. A lot of these things are coming into place. So new sectors, biotech, AI, robotics, all these new sectors, not only rely on the ICT skills, but you still need some of the intuitive skills. Oops. And these sectors are imposing standards, creating business models, or molding social governance, including social relationships across the whole line. So this is the big impact. The whole world is changing. We went through COVID. COVID came fast, forced everyone to change their behavior, forced everyone to start to think of what a digital workplace would look like. Everyone was forced to stay at home, working, managing teams, communicating, collaborating, all from the concept of Zoom for what it was in that sense. So the digitization of the workplace was really forced on us and people adapted. But now you're going through this thing where what is the new norm? And what we're seeing is sort of this K-shaped recovery, where you do get recovering industries, but you do see a lot of industries moving back to the old practices. Contrast with even Unit 4 when it starts to come through. And this has a structural change, especially on the broader society. So when we look at the recovery, China, Taiwan, South Korea, Vietnam are doing quite well, adopting the new ways of business, adopting the new policies driven behind the digital business models, and really starting to think about how can we apply that, whether that's simply enough as working from home or introducing new technologies into the model, into the workplace as a complement, but also taking over from human labor at the same time. So you see robotic surgery as a complement. The surgeon is running it, but we're using some brand new technology where you can do remote surgery, very defined remote surgery. You're seeing this in other ones coming as well. What we're also seeing India, Indonesia, Thailand, Japan, USA, and Europe, because of the over regulation, because USA, Europe, very much over-regulated, Asia, very much under-regulated. When you talk about over-regulation, that is sort of hindering the movement of innovation, hindering the introduction and the cost of new technologies into business models of products and services. This is where we're starting to see some real issues. So what is the new normal? That's the big question. So technology so far has created more jobs for society than it took away. If you look at the internet that came out mid-80s, early 90s, relatively a simple technology, non-sophisticated technology, a single technology, but you look at the disruption, consumer behaviors, business models, economic models, financial models, from a simple, unsophisticated technology, what happened in the 2000s. But again, if you lost your job, you start to learn HTML, XML based, you can learn some very primitive coding, you create a new company in a month, you got a web company in 3 months, and you can start with these new skills. But the issue here now is we're talking about really complex, sophisticated technologies and clustering of technologies. As some of these technologies are replacing jobs, it won't be so easy to learn these technologies and get back into the workforce. So complexity requires new understanding, new skills, new behaviors as we start to come in. Labor costs drive productivity, not the other way around. Eliminating human behavior, technology is going to increase productivity and revenues. So by reducing labor and transferring over, and then when we start to look at the elimination or the replacement of technology and human labor, we look at robotics and manufacturing, for example. Now, putting robotics into a manufacturing line, maybe you're going to have better optimization, better cost control, higher quality output. But robotics, in that sense, the real benefit is not simply replacing humans with robots. When we start to bring in, for example, a smart factory, when you bring robotics and replace humans, robots don't need a lunchroom. They don't need toilets. They don't need a parking lot. They don't really need lights on. They don't need air conditioning. They don't need holidays. They don't need pensions. They don't need health services. So really the cost reduction is not simply the cost of the robots to replace humans. It's everything wrapped around the automation, the smart systems that can be brought in, the lowering of costs, because robots don't require everything that humans require. And as we know, wages going up, cost of robotics coming down, simply a matter of time, and that's going to be replaced. And that will hit. You look at the garment industry across the board. Right now, currently, one automated sewing production line can replace about 100 human sewers. And that number is increasing, and the cost of those automated sewing production lines are decreasing. It's simply a matter of time. To compete in the world, you just have to go that way. Can't join in disruption. The legal status remains a bit ambiguous. Authorities and entrepreneurial both are confused. So as I said before, we're going to go through this transition phase, the next 5 to 10 years. A lot of different things are going to be happening. A lot of experimentation is going to happen. Not many are going to jump first. certainly from eliminating human or introducing robotics, artificial intelligence, some of this new technology, certainly in very commercialized areas. But the experimentation has already started. So it will be a transition time over the next 5 to 10 years. And the career path from one size fits all to one size fits one becomes specialized. Specialization is going to be really interesting going forward. As you probably know, through the history of demand for labor, you had specialized labor, went to generalized labor, went to specialized labor, now back to generalized labor. You'll see this in management theory. You see this as far as any of the business schools are pushing out, or any of the other ones. But now we're moving to the area of specialization. Specialization is going to be really interesting. And the last thing is, you can't digitalize intuition. So the big difference between talent and skills, these are two different areas. We talk about skills of knowing what to do, the talent of knowing how, when, where, and everything else to do it. And I was saying, skills can be easily replaced, talents cannot be. So having an understanding of what talents you have, and we start to look at this, I mean, when you start to look at IKEA, the time difference, 415 stores, 49 countries. Walmart starts to go global, big numbers, 15 countries, over 10,000 stores in 28 countries. And it took them 20, 30, 40 years to do it. You look at Taobao. Taobao started really around 2010. In 10 years, 10 million online merchants, 220 countries, over 1 billion products listed in Taobao right now. So you can imagine the expansion of Amazon and where that could go. Imagine the expansion of a lot of these digitalized platforms and where they can go. So the speed again, the complexity again, you can digitize the marketplace. And if we start to do it, digital technologies, firms to scale up and down quickly, managing their risk, managing the value creation on their side. New business model, digital platforms, often with few employees or tangible assets. And they go well beyond consumer behavior. Facebook is well beyond looking at demographics. When you look at a lot of the big data that's being drawn in by social media, they don't care if you're male or female. They don't care if you're black or white. They don't care if you're rich or poor. They don't care about a lot of these things. What they're looking at is behavioral change. What do they have to do to trigger a behavioral change? And then within that behavioral change, how can they sell more ads? How can they make you click on other things? So they're well beyond the simple demographics of understanding, creating digital twins of all the people on Facebook in the machine and trying to run scenarios on them to see where they're going. So, future of employment, digitally wired brains, really moving away from linear thinking to multidimensional thinking. The love of experiences. And again, when we get to intuition, when we get to talent, how does that create experiences? Experiences are going to be really big in the future. Increasingly impatient. Brand loyalty is down. Things are moving very quickly. How can your skills and talent enable a business to keep up with this rapid change? And loyal to a point. Working for one company, as we all know, is not going to be the future. Working for multiple companies, hopping from here to there, may be part of the future. Working for multiple companies at the same time, that's probably going to be a big part of the future. So organizational structures and hierarchies do not attract talent. It really is staff and understanding, how do you create the whole self and how do you bring that to the work? Instead of going for a single job description, how can then you apply to multiple job descriptions? The concept of psychological safety, if you look at Google Project Aristotle, how they start to look at what a workspace looks like. How do you increase productivity of humans? How do you introduce technology as a complement to human labor, human knowledge? Not a replacement, a complement. And how do you bring this in? Again, distributed controlled economic optimization based on talent, an enable environment, not hierarchy. So how do we shift from that? So we start to look at the last couple slides now, basically the areas of learning. And there's been studies, cognitive understanding, critical thinking, which you were not getting in the education models, and looking at how we bring that in, communication, storytelling, public speaking, asking the right question, messages, active listening, going across to interpersonal, fostering inclusiveness, teamwork effectiveness becomes very important. Even as self-leadership, we start to understand entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is coming basically in every course being taught nowadays. Entrepreneurship and innovation are being introduced and how that's being brought in. Goal achievement, not only when we talk about talent, ideas, a dime a dozen. Everybody's got ideas. The talent to turn an idea into something, a business model, a new application, the talent to actually do something with an idea is what's being required. And that's something that really cannot be replaced when we start looking to the future. Certainly across the digital side, digital literacy, data, smart systems, understanding a lot of this. No one's going to force you to write an algorithm, but understanding what algorithms can do is going to become increasingly important. So are you too late? COVID changed the workplace work experience. Technology is changing the economic and marketing models. Big questions you got to ask now. What is a job? How are jobs going to be defined in the future? How are you going to earn money in the future? What does that even mean as far as a personal economic model? And how will the future of your skills be applied? These have become really interesting when you start to look at it. And again, when we talk about the work, the workforce, and the workplace, a lot of this is going to be driven by talent. And this can be done articulating the changing nature of your skills, building talent that contributes to positive change, positive disruption, reimagining a new workplace to optimize your agility, your flexibility, and your performance and how you measure performance. These become the key skills as we start to enter into this transition phase over the next 10 years, where there's going to be a rapid introduction of technology, changing consumer behavior, changing political models and economic models, new business structures, and new priorities are going to start to come in, concepts of sustainability. These types of things are going to be coming in, and it's going to happen very fast. So with that very quick overview of what the future is looking like, I'm open to any questions.
Okay, thank you very much for this presentation, David. I think this is really a fascinating topic. So good that we can open the floor for questions. If you have questions, please raise your hand or just put your question in the chat box. Before we go into this, I have one question up front, because that was one very interesting aspect also in the book, and that was that you argued the need for digital unions.
I mean, the concept, unions were a great idea. They really were a great idea until they became politicized. And because of the politics became in as far as, creating the bias and using unions as a political tool, that sort of went down the wrong way. But when you start to look at in a digital economy, let's say where you do have a lot of people that are they have gig jobs, they're working for multiple companies at the same time. I mean, how do you protect yourself? And this is a question when we look at the social contract, right? When we look at this relationship between the private sector, the public sector, and citizens. Citizens have to fit into that. So when we talk about the social contract, how do then digital nomads or those that are working multiple gigs, how do they maintain and protect themselves over a rapidly changing economic model, which may be purely focused on revenues and profits, and not on social goods or public goods. So it's an interesting model, and there is some movement going into this concept of digital unions and how they can be applied.
Hmm. Do you think that there are different types of employees or workers emerging in this context?
Very much so. I mean, when I was growing up, I went to business schools in the 80s, got my first career job working for a corporation. And a lot of it was, you're working for the brand of the corporation. And then the relationship is, I rent them my labor and I get a salary for it. So there's a mutual expectation. I give them a certain amount of deliverables. They give me a certain amount of financial return and perhaps some status and some other returns as well, depending on the type of job that you're working with. But if you don't have a relationship like that, certainly a long-term relationship with a company, if you have multiple relationships, I mean, it really creates this sort of sense of individuality on one side, but also your own momentum, your own purpose, creating your own small business, which is you. And I think this is going to be the concept of entrepreneurial skills, managing disruption, creating value, managing risk. A lot of things when I work for a big company, I let the big company worry about that, and I don't worry about that. But if you are your own business and you're putting yourself out there, then you have to learn how to manage all those as well. And I think that's where the talent comes in over and above the skills. Having skills, that was an easy way out. But I think the future is not going to be, it's going to be well beyond that. You're going to have skills and talent going forward.
I see, I see. We have a question in the chat. With a couple of examples, could you explain a little bit more the prediction of rate of innovations exceeding the rate of innovation at some point?
Well, I think this is starting to happen right now, especially a good portion of my time is managing a research team, a technology research team, where we deal with non-commercialized technology. So technology that will not be onto the marketplace for 4 or 5 years. And if you look at the history going back to the 50s and 60s, where research institutions were creating all this technology, they didn't have a profit motivation. So you look at Rand, you look at Xerox, you look at a lot of these research institutions that a lot of it came out of Silicon Valley, but certainly the East Coast, and France and England. And so you start to see a lot of technology being created simply for technology's sake. And then the question is now, how do we apply this technology? Where can we apply this technology? So the technology was driving products and services. Then it came into this model of commercialization. And when you look at going through the 70s, 80s, 90s, even to the 2000s, where consumerism was really starting to come in, the whole shifted towards creating products and services, not pure technology, but creating products and services. Let's create a product or a service that we can sell and make money off. A revenue has got a revenue model, an income stream, and let's convince the consumers that they need to buy it. So it's shifted towards a more product and service development, and then looking for the technologies to support those ideas. But what we're seeing right now is that shift back to the research institutions. We're seeing now a lot of new innovation or invention, brand new materials being created through all nano and carbon modules and everything else, genomics, biotechnology, material sciences. We're seeing all this new math and artificial intelligence being created, not knowing what it's going to be applied to yet. So we're moving back into this era of invention. We're creating brand new things, not knowing where they're going to be applied yet. Now, automation and robotics can be applied in multiple fields, and that's where innovation is going to come in. But right now, it is the drive, and the money is backing behind it, is really to create brand new technologies, not products and services, creating brand new technologies, and then we'll see how that develops out into a product or a service. So I think we see this happening right now. And I think if you Google around, go to scholar.google.com. Don't go to google.com. Go to scholar.google.com, and you start looking at the academic papers and start to read and understand what is happening in the research world before it comes into the commercialized world. And you will start to understand where there's a lot of new things being invented right now that we don't quite know what they can be used for as a product or a service yet. I hope that answers your question.
I think so, but there's one question that is a little bit related to it in the chat comment and question. Being a user experience practitioner for a decade, my view on this new AI era is that we need to focus more on human cognition and humanity as a whole, which relates to the new approach of humanity-centered design. What is your take on focusing more on the human cognition, intelligence, and behavior to create solutions for people while leveraging the power of technology?
I mean, these are really perspectives that are coming out. So you've got human-centered design, and that's one side of the argument, that all new technology that really it's got to move from smart to intelligent. It really has to include humans in the equation. How are humans going to use this property and everything else? That's one side of the argument. The other side of the argument, not argument, but the discussion. The other side of the discussion is really around when you start to look at technology. Now, technology is at the level of human cognition right now. Whether that's publicly known or brought out, give it a year or two, this will all come out. AGI has been discovered. So it is, you can't tell the difference when you talk about cognitions around any artificial intelligence or humans in this sense. Now, how does that get applied? And this is where the important part comes in. And I believe you. I mean, this is where you really start to have to bring into the humans and the human experience into the introduction of technology into any space. Whether that is in the healthcare space, whether that is in the financial space. So complementing, introducing technology that complements humans. The question really comes up, and this is where the discussion gets interesting, is that what happens when the technology is so much better, can add so much more value, can manage risk so much better than humans can? At what point do you hand it over to technology? And I think the interesting point here is decision modeling. So when we get decisions are becoming incredibly complex, certainly for CEOs, certainly for politicians, anyone who's trying to manage major economies or major businesses, it is becoming incredibly complex where algorithmic solutions are going to be the only solutions out there. And we may not understand how these solutions are being developed or how they're being discovered. So this is the question we're at right now. Human-centered is interesting, but human serving maybe something a little bit better, even when it gets to the point where technology is so advanced that we ourselves don't quite understand the technology. And that's where the question comes in right now. Around human cognition, we've got a certain level of RAM, we've got a certain level of understanding, but there are issues out there that are too complex for humans to figure out. And technology is really starting to replace that. The question is now, how do the two live together? And I think that's where human experience or human-centered is going to be. We're not human-centered, but human-compatible. And how do we work with that?
Absolutely.
And it does sound a little bit science fiction-ish, but we are moving into that era of science fiction. The advancements of algorithms is huge, and algorithms are basically based off nature's math, right? It's the same math that a forest would use to decide how many trees over a certain plotted line that could maximize the nutrition coming out of the ground and the sun coming out of the sky. I mean, it's the same natural math, and there is no, it's pure logic in that sense. There's no bias. Humans are the ones that bias algorithms. So when you talk about the new policies around AI ethics, we really should be talking about human ethics, reevaluation of human ethics, not AI ethics. There's no ethics involved in pure math. It really comes down to human ethics. And I think this is when we talk about, human centered. Human centered for which humans? Humans are so biased. I mean, human centered for the middle class or wealthy, human centered for poor and those living in rural communities. Where do we start to think of what is that center of, or how do we define humans as we go forward? And I think it's a really interesting discussion.
It's a very interesting discussion, and it's a lot going on in this field. Montakan, you unmuted yourself. Do you have a question?
Uh, uh, Not a question, just some comment. I am in the tourism industry. I think, yeah, the industry, the workplace tend to go on the technology, AI, automation. But I think in your free time or your individual space, I think ones are long for human service, human touch, and human, back to the basic. I feel that myself when we are in the workplace, we tend to go with the technology, but in our time, free time, we look for something basic. I think there are still room for tourism and hospitality to provide that touch.
There's a really interesting era of neuropsychology right now that deals with cyber identity disorders. Those that feel much more comfortable online than they do offline. And we're moving into an era, especially when you talk about virtual reality, augmented reality, what's called XR, full body reality. And we're not that far off from some of the technologies that are entering the marketplace where you can create the sensation of being human in a totally digital environment. And if you can design the environment in which you live, work, and play, and build relationships, the big question for a lot of people is, would you do it? And the answer is a lot of them would, because the physical life is hard for all people.
Mhm.
And quite honestly, I mean, anyone who's on this call, I mean, you're in the top 10, 20% anyways. You're not going to be affected by this too much. You're going to be riding that wave a little bit. But when you look at the bottom 60% of the population of the world, those that don't have interesting jobs, those that don't have education, access to healthcare, those that don't have these types of things, that is the human. When we talk about human centered or human experience, that's the humans we should be talking about, not necessarily all about us, because we're all in that top 10, 20% anyways. And we will have the ability to ride the wave out and not be impacted, or at least impacted in a positive sense, more positive than negative. But the bottom 60% of the population of the world that may be losing their jobs, may be losing their access to financial support, this is where we really have to consider what is a priority in life. Family, always. We all know that. We all need family. We all need human touch. We all need people around us. We're social animals. But that's not the we have to survive in the world coming down the pipeline over the next 10, 20 years. So that's the one thing I would consider is what we need in this group here may not necessarily be representative of what the bottom 60% of the world need, where they may need to get the basics done first, right? Financial support, house over their heads, some food to eat. That is their main priority right now, not necessarily tourism that we can enjoy, traveling around, going out to restaurants and this type of stuff. And this is an interesting when we get into the future of work. The future of work is not necessarily all about us or the people in this group right now. It is about the bottom 60% of the population, their future of work. That's the tough part that we have to consider in some sense if we were going to believe in the future of the social contract, the future of equity, inclusiveness, and these types of things. It's the bottom 60% that we have to sort of build the world for. How are they going to be taken care of in the future of work? That's the interesting part.
And I think this is the discussion that we need to that we need to have, and that needs to continue. We have come a long way. Some people refer to the early days of capitalism, Industry Revolution 1, like Manchester capitalism, and we probably don't want to miss the things that were invented that made the society go faster. But also it needed some time to figure out some rules and some ways how we can deal with it, starting from labor rights, safety, and the overall social contract that needs to be renegotiated. And it seems a little bit like we are in another stage where we might leapfrog with technology like AI, and that needs an adjustment of the social contract, possibly.
I think it's interesting in that. I mean, I'd be curious for those that are on the call, just to put into the chat. I mean, what's your interest in the future of work? I mean, are you HR type people? Are you education type people? Looking at the future of education or skills development? I'd be curious just to see what, and again, I mean, people are shy, they don't like to talk, but if you can write in the chat about, what's your interest in this type of thing, I'm curious about that. But it is, I mean, the digitalized social contract, what is the concept of it? What is the relationship now between governments and private sector? Social dividend, I agree with that. But what is the relationship, again, as we talk, what is the relationship between private, public sector and citizenship? And where is that going, especially now when we see so much upheaval, moving now towards, a lot of governments moving towards nationalism. A lot of the economic models are starting to shift around with digital currencies, potentially a fully digital currency with central bank digital currencies. Even universities now introducing entrepreneurship and innovation is interesting in some digital skills, but lifelong learning. It doesn't end after a 4-year bachelor's. It doesn't end after a 2 years master's, even into the PhD level, right? The world will be continually changing over the next while. So what does that mean for education? And at the same time, what does that mean for jobs? Are you be doing a new job every 5 years with some new skills, doing it in a new era? Interesting.
Absolutely, can't agree more. And that's why I think one of the most important things you learn at university, hopefully, is not so much domain knowledge, but to learn how to learn and to learn how to adapt to new situations. I think that should be one of the main takeaways for students. And I hope it will help to master the challenges that we most certainly will face in the next years ahead. Thank you so much, David. We reached the end of our webinar for today. Thanks so much for all the questions and comments. I think it was really helpful and interesting. And I hope to see you again soon in one of our webinars or at one or the other occasion. Stay in touch. Have a nice day, evening, morning, wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.